You've heard the conventional view. Now prepare yourself to hear the other side. High school teachers Mike Margison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Margison, and Spears.
That's right. Good Monday evening out there to everybody. Hope that you got your week off to a good start. I am Justin Spears, one half of The Other Side, and joined with me, as always, on the other side of the computer is Mr. Mike Margison. Mike, what is going on, man?
Not much. I'm little dismayed about the first snowfall. It's getting kind of ugly out there. Weather's turning bad, but it is what it is. It's Indiana, so it's my 13th year here, and I'm not any more acclimated to it than I was when I first got here.
Yeah, it can be brutal to get used to, and I'm a Hoosier lifer, and I still never get used to it. Really, it just kind of comes up on you, and you just kind of have to sit back and say, well, there's not much I can do about it, and roll with the punches. So
yeah,
well, we want to welcome you guys to our show finale. If you've been joining us over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the fact that after this show, we are going to go on a temporary hiatus, and we're going to focus our time and attention on writing a book. We've really enjoyed and appreciated, as we've said every week, the opportunities that we've had to be able to share our message with people. I put a message out on Facebook to our listeners and followers and just thank them for the time that they've spent listening to us and the feedback that we've gotten and comments that we've gotten. We've really appreciated that, and we hope that this book endeavor that we're going on will pay dividends, and we'll be able to engage people through that as well. We just feel this calling to do this, and we feel like what we're laying out for you in this episode and what we laid out last week will kind of set the stage for what we plan to talk about. And I did want to mention too here real quickly before we get going that this book is hopefully going to be written in an engaging level. It's certainly not an academic book. It's not a totally research book. There will be some research mentioned throughout the book, but it's certainly not intended to be a deeply sourced book. It's really just our reflections and views on where education is as we see it in our time in the classroom and as now parents and things of that nature. And so as we go through this stuff, we hope that it's something that, no matter what phase of life you're in, if you've got someone in school, if you're, really happy with education that your child is getting in American schools, or dissatisfied or whatever it might be, that this book would appeal to you and call to you. So having said that, as we always say, if you are interested in listening to this show or any of our previous shows, you can get our archive on our YouTube page. If you search Mike Justin, The Other Side on YouTube, you will get all of our previous shows going back to the very beginning. You can get our archived shows on the Spreaker radio app. That's an app that you can download in the Google Play or iTunes account. You can find our shows on iTunes. Our shows are broadcast there, as well as Google Play podcasts. And we've said before, a big thanks to the Cerberus Radio Network, to Dave Peach over at WCVL 92.1, 1550 AM out of Crawfordsville. They rebroadcast our shows for us several months now on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. And we've let them know, and we thank them and appreciate the work that they've done for us. So having kind of gotten that, as we say, out of the way every week, let's get into this episode. And before we talk about results, and that's what we're going to focus on this week, is, what are the results of kids going through the American schooling system. I real quickly wanted Mike to just kind of do a recap of what he talked about last week with history. So Mike, if somebody hadn't had a chance to listen to last week's episode or may have kind of forgotten, what was it that you talked us through last week?
Okay, sure. Yeah, this is a two-part episode that we're doing, and these are going to be the main two parts of the book, which is the history of the American school system and then the results of the American school system. And one of the things that I alluded to last week was the results will make a lot more sense to you if you understand the history. So we did the history last week, and I'll go real quick here. The point of this is that the American school system was not designed for individual intellectual advancement. That's not what that's not what its purpose was. It wasn't designed for complex thinking and problem solving and all of the things that we tend to think schools are doing. They're not. And Justin, you're going to get to that today. But the reason that they're not is because that was never the original aim. And part of this comes from the fact that the inspiration for the American school system was the German system. And we talked about that last week. The German system was brought about, actually, it was transformed due to a couple military blunders that happened during the Napoleonic Wars in the early 19th century. And really what the German leaders wanted was a total restructuring of German society, and key in that restructuring was educational reform. And the purpose of the educational reform was, again, not individual intellectual advancement, not complex problem solving. It was obedience to the government. It was compliance. These were the two main objectives of the German education system. And when our, I guess, educational leader, the father of our American school system, Horace Mann in this country, originally was intended to adopt an educational system in Massachusetts, which was his home state. He went out and about to Europe and looked at different models and settled on this German one. It was called Prussia at the time, but he settled on the Prussian model. And given that the aim of the Prussian model was obedience to the government and compliance, right, we can see that the results, when we get the results today, society, we tend to scratch our heads and look at this and say, what went wrong? What happened? But the results make a whole lot of sense to me, because the results are perfect for what the original aim was. So Justin, let me kick it over to you now. What have been the results? We have this system of government schools that all kids are pretty much forced to go through. What have been the results? Positive?
Well, unfortunately not. And I think over the history of compulsory schooling here in the United States, on top of the layer of what you took us through, we also have to acknowledge that economic leaders, business leaders have also kind of latched onto the education system as a way to kind of mold the student into the worker, right? That goes all the way back to the Industrial Revolution, and we saw the big economic titans of that era really buy into this idea of American schooling, because they saw it as an opportunity to teach, the students how to work by the clock and how to be obedient and follow directions and walk on this side of the hallway and, greet people in certain ways. And it was, again, all an obedience. And I think that when you go at it from that perspective of obedience, what does that tend to do to an individual? It tends to break their free will, right? And you've talked about this before in the past, where once that is broken, that curiosity of learning is broken. And that's really the bottom line as to what we've seen American schooling do to our children. It's squashed that love of learning that really should and is in everybody's heart as they're growing up. When you watch a young child learn how to talk or walk or solve a problem, it's a beautiful thing, right? Because there's struggle in it, there's growth in it, there's success, there's failure, all of the things that are associated with education. But then the schooling comes along and it starts to really put the vices on that. And those types of things aren't tolerated. So we've talked before in the past about kinesthetic learners that are just absolutely crushed by the school system because they don't know how to play the game of sitting at a desk still, eyes on me, bubbles in the mouth, crisscross applesauce, arms folded, all of these different things that we, just beat year in and year out. And then when they don't do it, we tell them you're ADHD or you've got all these problems. So there's these issues that I'm going to talk about towards the end but then there are the hard numbers, right? And so one of the things that I looked at, and I'm going to rely a little bit on in my part of the book, is to talk about this assessment that's used in an international sense, known as the PISA, and the group that runs this is the Organization for Economic Co-op and Development. There's 34 countries that take part in this. They're industrialized, modernized countries that take part in this. Many of them European, but also from other parts like South America, Australia, and whatnot. They're from all over the globe. And it really paints a pretty dire picture of where the United States is in terms of math and language arts scores. And I'm just going to read some highlights through this report and kind of talk to you a little bit about the parts here. So the key findings first starts off by saying, while the U.S. spends more per student than most countries, and obviously if you heard that, you'd go, no way, because we're constantly hearing we need more money, we need more money. But the U.S. does spend more money per student than most countries. Says this does not translate into better performance. For example, the Slovak Republic, which spends around $53,000 per student, performs at the same level with the United States, which spends $115,000 per student, so more than double what this country in what would be considered a fairly economically suppressed part of the world spends. They go on to say just over 1 in 4 U.S. students do not reach the PISA baseline level 2 of mathematics proficiency, higher than OECD average proportion, and one that hasn't changed since 2003. So we're seeing stagnant results. At the opposite end of the proficiency scale, the U.S. has a below average share of top performers. So even our top performing math students are at the bottom of the top end when compared to international students. And then it goes on to talk a little bit about weaknesses. And this is kind of exactly what you hit on there, Mike, with what you were talking about a second ago. We and our students tend to struggle with tasks such as taking real world situations, translating them into mathematical terms, and interpreting mathematical aspects in a real world problem. So that's that application, that's that problem solving that you talked about earlier. Our students just really struggle at being able to perform those tasks. And to kind of supplement that in the strengths and weaknesses part in the mathematics test on this, one of the few strengths that they say is that our students do a pretty good job of being able to read data when it's put in a graph form and chart form. Our students can do a really solid job of looking at it and being able to tell you, the percentages and everything. So in other words, they can read the data, but when it comes time to interpreting it and making anything of it, we really, really struggle, right? So there's that lack of knowledge of being able to make sense as to what the data says. And we see that a lot of social studies teachers, when we ask for our students to perform those higher level thinkings, to analyze, to synthesize, to accept or reject, to defend or reject a thesis, they have trouble doing that. They can tell you what a particular event occurred or what somebody's thoughts were, or they can tell you order of events chronologically. But then if you ask them to make something out of that, right, to create something new out of it or analyze it, they really struggle with being able to do that. And again, a lot of that has to do with the way in which American schools are set up.
All right, Justin, can I jump in real quick there?
Yeah,
It's almost like what you're saying is the student, they're good kids. Like obediently, they will do the problem. Like they'll do what's asked. Like if you ask them, okay, read this graph or do this worksheet, or but then if you ask them to go a step further with some like intellectual dissection of the material, that's where it starts to fall apart.
Yeah, absolutely, and it could come, at least in my expertise and opinion, is that it really comes in one of two ways. Either they give it a decent try, but it's just not there, or they just get frustrated and quit. And that's really, I think, what I see a lot of is the frustration and quitting part. I don't know what are your opinion on that?
Oh, absolutely. They don't have the academic stamina to stay with a problem for all that long. I heard this, or this was told to me some years ago, but some group was doing this experiment using students from China and students from the United States, and they gave each group of kids an unsolvable problem, but the kids didn't know it was unsolvable. And so anyway, they took the high school, United States kids who were in high school. They gave them this unsolvable problems, and they timed them how long it would take before they quit. And for the American students, the average was about 12 minutes. They worked on it, they looked at it, they couldn't figure it out, and after 12 minutes, they gave up. With the Chinese student, it was something like 2 hours and 45 minutes before they were giving up, and they were, like asking, like, can we have a clue or a hint, or is there another way to look at this, where they were really actually trying to solve the problem. But look at that gap between the time. That's really what's telling to me. So yeah, I would agree with you there that that academic stamina isn't there.
Yeah, and to kind of build off of that from a personal experience as to what you've told me before, you've shared that story of a question that you had asked, I think, a couple years back. It was a two-part question, something like with who was the Secretary of State in this year.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like a Google search question, and the key is to see how students would respond. And what they ended up doing was verbatim putting into Google what I said, but there's no way, given the layers of the question, there's no way that would yield the correct answer. And all of the students just, immediately wrote their answer down, given literally the first Google search response that came up. And that was it. And only like one in the class actually went through the layers of the question and figured it out. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah. So yeah, those are some issues. And again, we're kind of giving you the Cliff Notes version of this. Obviously our book will go into a little bit more detail, but I did want to take some time to address this as well, because I think oftentimes defenders of this system will immediately jump in with, yeah, but, right? They'll come back with, well, yeah, but they take the cream of the crop in international schools when they test them. And, we've got a lot of poverty. We test everybody. We don't spend as much. Education isn't as big of a priority in some of our parts of the country. And so they actually have a part of the PISA report that says, what difference does context make? And it says the wealth of the United States mean it can spend more on education. 12% of the variation between OECD countries mean scores can be predicted on the basis of per capita GDP. The United States once ranks third after Luxembourg and Switzerland in terms of per capita GDP, has a substantial economic advantage over many other OECD countries. However, only Austria, Luxembourg, Norway, and Switzerland spend more. So we are spending a lot of money, as I alluded to earlier, yet we're not getting these results. Parents in the United States are better educated than in most other countries. The United States ranks 6th highest among OECD countries in percentage of 35 to 44-year-olds who have attended tertiary or school outside of secondary school in terms of its student population. And this is what I highlighted, circled, starred. The share of students, because this is what we hear all the time. We always hear about the poor, the poverty. You don't understand, Spears. These people come from poverty. They have nothing to their name. The share of students from disadvantaged backgrounds in the United States is about average. A comparison of the socioeconomic status of the most disadvantaged quarter of students across OECD countries puts the United States around the OECD average, while the socioeconomic status of the U.S. student population as a whole ranks clearly above the OECD average. So, I really have a hard time coming to that conclusion when I hear that thrown up as a reason why these things why these schools do not perform well. And so one of the last things that I wanted to hit out of this report here, which I found really telling, is the organization of schooling. It says on average across OECD countries, schools with more autonomy over curricula and assessments tend to perform better than schools with less autonomy when they are a part of a school system with more accountability arrangements and greater teacher-principal collaboration in school management. How often do we hear that we're handcuffed? We're handcuffed by what the state wants or what the national government wants. And of course, we've been calling for decentralized schooling and education, as you talked about, the abolishment of this system that we have. Around 3 out of 4 students in the United States attend schools that compete with at least one other school for enrollment. Yet there is no evident cross-country relationship between the degree of competition among schools and student performance. Well, that's because, again, no matter where you go, right, you're going to get the same thing. So if we really were able to break this thing open and, really provide some choice in the marketplace for students, those results may look a lot different. And that's just something that we're currently not getting. So that was as of 2012. And if you think things have gotten any better over the course of the last 5 to 6 years, you're mistaken. I've got an article here from Education Week that came out on June 4th of this year. And this is some results from the National Assessment of Educational Progress Test, or the NAEP. And it kind of goes through and says that this is the nation's report card, as we call it. And the average scores, which measure student performance in math and reading for nationally representative sample of 4th through 8th graders, indicate a general stagnation compared with 2 years ago. And the results from 2 years ago were significantly below those from 4 years ago. So basically, they're trying to spin it as like, okay, well, we didn't go down, backslide anymore, but we were still lower than where we were 6 years ago at this point now. And this is, again, I look for compelling kind of telling statements here. This is what I kind of highlighted here. The common reaction to the NAEP results for parents, policymakers, and school leaders has the tone of, oh, darn, we need to do better. But there is no sense of urgency, nor is there much realization that we have essentially had the same results and the same education for 4 decades. And I would argue it goes back even further than that. Math and reading scores of 17-year-olds, for instance, are unchanged since the 1970s. So they was talking about what's the definition of insanity, right? It's doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. It's absolutely insane to continue to put our kids into these school systems that are producing the same results, and to just simply sit here and say, well, this is the problem, that's the problem. It's the policymakers. It's these politicians who aren't in the classroom, that aren't teaching. Yes, they are a part of the problem, but they're not the whole problem, right? And it's kind of, again, a telling statement here, where the author of this article says, it is well documented that people with a better education tend to earn more over their lifetimes. And I boxed in that phrase, better education, right? Because what does that even mean? I think, honestly, what the system that we're currently living through produces is a quantity over quality, right? What really he is trying to say here is that employers value the amount of education. Why do we place such a big deal on getting a high school diploma? It's not necessarily always so that somebody would be qualified to go to college, because certainly we know there are people that walk across the stage to get a high school diploma that aren't and won't ever be qualified to go to college. What that does is it signals to the marketplace that you've completed up through the 12th grade of public schooling. That is going to bode much better for you than if you completed just 11 years or up to the 11th grade. The same way that somebody who goes off to college and completes just 1 year of school is going to earn more than somebody who doesn't go at all. So really, it's quantity over quality. And I think that phrase, better education, is a kind of a misnomer. We talk about that from time to time. And then finally here, they kind of give a little bit of a, what can be done about this. And he says, improving student outcomes has proved difficult in large part because we are unwilling to take any major steps to make schools better. And again, that's exactly what I would, and I think Mike and I have said and will continue to say in our book, and what we said in these podcasts is, we continue to see the same recycled ideas. And you can point the finger at No Child Left Behind, A Nation at Risk, Race to the Top, whatever political ideology you're a part of here, that really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's the system, dummy, right? Just like it's the economy, stupid, it's the system, dummy. This system of American schooling, not education, as Mike, you pointed out, and we've said before, what we see here is not education, it's schooling. It's a system of taking kids and molding them into citizens, right? We teach citizens. My fifth and third grade students get citizenship reports, citizenship scores. They get green and red dojos. They get marked up and down on the X and happy face chart. We're teaching them how to behave. We're teaching Right. Obedience, right? We're not even teaching them how to behave. We're teaching them obedience, right? You weren't sitting still listening to the teachers with your eyes and ears on me. You were off daydreaming or looking out the window when really they're bored out of their mind. Or really, yeah, I could go back and repeat to you word for word what you just said. I just didn't demonstrate it in the way that you want me to. So therefore, you're a malcontent. Therefore, you're ADHD, you're autistic, you're all of these other things that just absolutely wrecks the creativity and desire where, my kids are in 5th and 3rd grade, and they are both coming to hate school. I mean, literally, they have a hatred for school. They're bored out of their mind. We've had instances this year of just things that are your greatest fears of bullying on the bus, of just a lack of communication from the school. It really is a case textbook example of what this system is doing to our students. So I wanted to kind of wrap up here tonight with this last little bit here. And again, this is something that will be addressed in the book in greater detail. But I constantly hear, and I got into this over the weekend in a Facebook exchange with some educators and others, and that is, well, we just do too much standardized testing. We're teaching to the test. It's all about standardized testing and whatnot. And really, yeah, some of that may be true. It may be true that, you're handcuffed a little bit on having to teach to the test. But do you really have to? Right? I mean, everybody gets caught up about this 4-star school, or we're an A+ school, or we're a blue ribbon school, or whatever it might be. These same people that are griping and complaining about the confines that they're constrained to in teaching play the game to get the accolades from the government, right? So if you really truly cared about educating a child, you would say, I cannot in good conscience and good faith do this. Take some of that autonomy back and say, no, we're no longer going to teach to the test here at this school. We're going to educate our children. We're going to present to them opportunities to learn in a way in which best suits them, and not just pay lip service to inclusion and higher order thinking and all of these other edu-speak terms that get thrown around that really
never get done. They have no interest in doing them, actually.
Right. Absolutely. 100% agree there. And so, if we really wanted to look at what is it that we should be accomplishing, I'm currently reading a book right now by a gentleman named Tony Wagner called The Global Achievement Gap: Why Even Our Best Schools Don't Teach the New Survival Skills Our Children Need and What We Can Do About It. And I'm about a quarter of the way through the book, and I just finished the chapter here where he lays out what the skills should be that our students should be getting in school and aren't being taught. And I won't have time to break all of these down. I'll do it in more detail in the book, but I at least want to give the listener a sense as to what this is. So the first one that he talks about is one that we have talked about in here already, and that is critical thinking and problem solving. And as I said, he goes through and talks about what that truly looks like in talking to work leaders in the community, business leaders and things of that nature, workers at businesses, as to what that truly looks like. It's being able to communicate. It's being able to work with people, which leads into the second skill, which is collaboration across networks and leading by influence. I think I told the story of a friend of mine who works at Rolls-Royce, and he doesn't have a desk at his office. He's a free space worker. Because he could be collaborating with people in different departments at any given time. And that's what they want at Rolls. They want people being able to bump up against each other and throw ideas around. Even if you're in marketing and I'm in finance, or somebody's in HR or whatever, that's going to lead to the best results when your people are able to work with one another to get solutions. The third one is agility and adaptability, which, as you can imagine, are all about being flexible, not being in that closed mindset and rigid, but being open to ideas and adapting, from different cultures. The author talks a lot about working with people and how important it is in business world to be able to work with people from different cultures and backgrounds to build off strengths from others. The fourth one that he talks about is innovation and entrepreneurialism, which, again, our system in school kills, right? Because we're taught to give the right answer, play it safe. We're not taught to take risks and go out on a limb. And that's what entrepreneurialism is all about. It's about going out and striking it out on your own and trying to do things on your own. And so, again, you see that as lacking as well. The fifth skill, effective oral and written communication. It shocked me reading this section here to listen to what some of these business leaders had to say in terms of the lack of people being able to advocate for themselves, to be able to take a position and defend it, or be able to put together an interoffice memo in a proper structure. It's just almost virtually non-existent. And then finally, The sixth skill, which we talked about in the PISA score, is accessing and analyzing information, right? Being able to not only know where to get information, but then once you find it and get it, being able to make something out of it. And again, that kind of feeds into some of those other skills there that the author was talking about. All of those things kind of blend together to build what employees are looking for in terms of jobs that we have on the horizon. And again, I don't necessarily hear anything out of that. Mike, I'll bring you in and get your opinion on this. I don't hear anything out of those six skills that screams to me, I have to have a master's degree or a bachelor's degree or a doctorate to be able to do. These are skills that every 17 and 18-year-old that's walking out of a high school should have.
Oh, absolutely. Actually, in one of the books that both you and I have been reading, it's Bryan Caplan's The Case Against Education, and he is an economist, so he looks at this from a standpoint of just simply efficiency. And I think the subtitle of the book is Why Our Education System is a Waste of Time and Money. But in it, he makes this kind of joke where if you were an alien and you were coming down from outer space and you had to guess, you had to theorize as to what type of jobs were in high demand in the U.S. economy by only going what our high schools taught kids to do. If that's the only thing that you had to go by, you might think that there was this need for foreign language translators, like this giant need for foreign language translators. Of course, we're sticking all of these kids. It's a mandate. You cannot graduate without taking a foreign language. Literary criticism. You have to go in and deconstruct Shakespeare and all of these old works. And his point was kind of, we are having kids do these things, but they do not translate into what the world actually demands, which are those six things that you described. It's those things that you described is what the global economy right now is screaming for. And we're doing something totally different. Learn French. It's bizarre. If you step back and you actually look at it, you're like, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing to these kids? Because we're not preparing them for anything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the statistics speak for themselves. And, to kind of wrap this up, because I know people get very hot and emotional about this, especially those who are in education that may hear this and think, oh, well, you guys, well, yeah, we are. We're anti what this system is producing. And if you're not, just to be quite blunt, there's got to be something wrong with you. You're just looking to protect the old guard way. And, maybe it gets as deep as, you're just looking to protect this system of education or schooling, as we call it.
How Justin, let me piggyback on that point. How could you care about kids learning and support the system we have right now? Those two things seem totally incompatible to me. Totally.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You're right. That is a very good way of saying it. I don't know what justification you can make, and to just say we should throw more money at it or we need to get the politicians out of it. No, I think, as you said, this system needs to be completely overhauled, not renovated, not reformed, completely thrown away with, and start from scratch. I don't know completely, and we'll have a solutions section of the book, what the answer is. I've got some ideas, and we've got some ideas as to what it's going to look like. But listen, I didn't even touch upon in this episode, you'll have to read the book if you want to get this more, but we haven't even touched upon what this is doing to the kids' emotion. I mentioned it briefly when I talked about the fact that kids are told that they're ADHD, autistic, Asperger's, they're all these different things. And again, some of that stuff may be true, but by and large, I know that there are a lot of kids that are doped up on medication that have no reason, no business being, just so that they'll be calm, good students in the building that they're in. And this is having effects where kids are not resilient. Kids are stressed out. When you ask a child today what their number one stressor is, they're going to say school, hands down. It's school. It might be because their parents are stressing them out, their teachers are stressing them out, whatever it is. Friends in school, they're scared to go because of bullying. They're scared to go because of all these other, one of the things I say about schools, what about the socialization? It's anti-social in many regards for students. They're ostracized, they're set aside, they're kicked to the curb. The kids in the middle are left behind while the kids at the bottom get all the attention and resources with the kids at the top. We've got this large mass group of students that are just wasting away day after day, bored out of their mind, not challenged, not getting the skills that they need to prepare them for their adult life. And so that's going to be kind of the second part of my part of the book, is we're going to talk about the psychological impact that schooling is having on our kids as well, where we're seeing, suicide rates that are climbing, depression rates that are climbing. And again, a lot of that has to do with and again, this isn't a personal attack on anybody, it's the system. But we're definitely going to hit that up in the book as well.
Yeah. What about being told that you're a failure every single day of your life from the time you're 5 through the time that you're 18, because you don't want to sit through these stupid lectures and do these stupid worksheets? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, how does that have to sit with you? I mean, that's got to be brutal.
Yeah, well, and again, I'm not going to out the teacher, but my third grade teacher sent a test home. Now, this is real life. This really happened. Sent a test home that my son took last Friday, where he got a 65% F, which is an F in or 64% F. That's an F in our school district. We're not on a 10-point scale, and simply wrote on the test. This was an open book test. Sends a message to my wife saying he needs to do the test corrections. Like, what is that?
What is he? So he's a bad kid? Is that what you're saying?
Like, well, yeah. Like, why don't you tell me what you did to work with him? What did you do to go over and find out why this happened, and maybe spend some time to try to work with him and find out, like, hey, look, did you just not read, and how did you as the teacher not know this going into the test? It was like he should have known where the answers were. He could have taken the book home and read through it. Well, why wasn't he sent the book home? He's 8 years old. You're the teacher. Why don't you stick it in his book bag and tell him, listen, you're falling behind this week on this book. You need to take it home with a note saying you need to put in some extra work on this. Then we get another note saying that, well, he hasn't read enough books and done book reports this year. He needs to, or I'm going to start sending reading charts home. When we met during teacher parent conferences, it was told that this was an optional thing, that they could read books and do reports on them. It wasn't a requirement. Now, all of a sudden, we're being told your child isn't reading enough. You have no idea how much my child is reading because you haven't taken the time to ask. You've made an assertion, you've made an assumption, and you sent something home basically telling me that I'm a bad parent and my student and my son isn't doing what you think he should be doing. Yeah, that's the type of feedback that we get in the system here. So again, when we wonder why students are so stressed out or why they feel like they're failures, as you adequately pointed out, this is part of the problem.
That's unacceptable. I mean, it's honestly unacceptable.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. So hopefully, guys, obviously we're going to spend some time here over the course of the next couple months putting this thing together. We'll be providing you some input and feedback on how we're doing, or some updates, I should say, on how we're doing. We would love, as we get this thing closer to go, we're going to probably roll it out to some people and get some feedback from them before we roll it out and put it out there for purchase. And so we hope that if you have any interest at all, you'd be willing to take a chance and read through it and review it, and give us a shout out or a feedback or something, so we kind of know what your thoughts are on it. And like I said, we'll continue to be active through our social media accounts and things of that nature, and we'll be in touch with you. And as we said, you never know. Once we get through this and we see what the reaction is to it, maybe we'll bring the podcast back and build off the book, or go in a different direction. So again, we want to thank everybody for the time that they put in listening to the shows. Mike, this has been a blast. I've really appreciated it and enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to writing this book with you. I think this is going to be a lot of fun as we go through and put this thing together.
Likewise. I echo those sentiments exactly.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of The Other Side. Again, just as one last reminder, if you are interested, if you've heard this toward the end of our episodes and you want to hear more of what we've done, you can always go back in our archives in those different formats that I mentioned: iTunes, Google Play Podcasts, the Spreaker app. You can get us on our YouTube channel, Mike Justin The Other Side, and you will find all of our episodes then. So until we talk again, you have now heard The Other Side.
You've heard the